Greg Biffle, NTSB preliminary report. I read the report and I wrote down 20 things. The first thing we want to note, the plane was full of fuel. So it's full of fuel. I think we had 5 passengers plus the crew, 7. The plane was maxed out. The first thing. The second thing, Mr. Dutton was in the left seat and his son was in the right seat. His son had a private pilot license with an instrument rating. He didn't have a multi-engine rating. He didn't have an SIC. He hasn't had it that we know of training. Now we know he didn't have an SIC and we know he didn't have a multi-engine rating. So the dad was in the left seat. The son was in the right seat. Greg Biffle was not sitting, because there's not a seat there. He was kind of in the aisle, looking at the pilots, talking to them. That's never good. You never want the owner who's a pilot, who's knows about the engine, the mechanics, and the avionics, sitting there telling you stuff, You just don't want that, because that's a big problem. I've had that before. And most of the time, I just ignore them. And then when we go to dinner, I kind of talk to them about it. You got to use the sandwich method. You can't say, look, don't be up there interfering. You just kind of got to say, look, that's just not a good situation. But most of the time, rich owners, they don't want to hear that. They say, this is my airplane. I know how to fly. I'm a pilot. I know about mechanics. They want to come up there and do that. It's like Jerry Jones with the Dallas Cowboys. He bought that franchise cheap. Now it's the biggest sports franchise in the world. He makes all the decisions. He makes money off of cups, parking, beer, t-shirts, sticker. He makes a lot of money anyway. But if he would stay out of the coaching business, they probably would have won 5 or 6 more Super Bowls. But that's his baby. That's his company. He's an owner. He can do what he wants. And that's the way these owners in these jets feel. They want to sit up there and tell you stuff. Can't have that. You just can't have that. Owners, you can't do that. You hired the guy to fly the plane. Sit in the back and leave him alone. Don't be up there. The engine instrument's wrong. We should climb. That's what he was doing. At one point he said, we should climb. The engine instruments are not right. So you never really want that. Now, when they tried to start the plane, they did a battery start. You can do a battery start. But when you do a battery start, your battery takes a hit. It takes a lot of power to turn over that turbine to get that engine running. The first one they tried to start, it didn't work. So they already took a hit on their battery. I don't think I've ever been to that airport, but most of these airports have a cart that you can plug in and use the cart to save your battery. Because before you even start it, you got to turn the battery on and check it to make sure it has the proper voltage to even do the start. A lot of times they want to charge you $75 to use the cart. If you buy fuel, they'll waive that. If you go in there and talk nice, they'll waive that. I have had that cart fee waived so many times because I went in there humbly and talked nice. You can get that waived, but if you buy fuel, you'll get that waived. If you're in a hurry, don't want to wait for the cart, let's go, go. Hit the battery start, you're already in trouble. You're already rushing, okay? Remember, never let the airplane, the boss, the passengers, or the controllers rush you. You just never do that. If you're in there rushing, you don't want to let's don't wait for a battery card. It's going to take another 10 minutes. You're already making poor decisions. Okay, now, when they were taxiing, Mr. Biffle's up there saying, the thrust reverser light is not working. One of the lights were not working. Now you always do a thrust reverser check to stow them on the ground. You do that check on the ground. I assumed they did that check and the light still wasn't working, so they just decided to go ahead and go because they were working properly. Thrust reverser deployment on takeoff or in flight is one of the worst things that can happen. That's a no-go right there. When you're taxiing out and you got an indicating light that's not working, that's a no-go. You got to stop. Having your son in the right seat, when your license says you must have a qualified SIC, that's a no-go. Busting that battery up, that's a no-go, not using the cart. Taxiing out and have a thrust reverser light not working, that's a no-go, okay? You got 3 no-goes and you haven't even made it to the end of the runway. The biggest no-go of all the no-goes, they took off VFR and they were going to pick up their IFR flight plan in the air. Why did they do this? 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes, save 10 minutes. I never, ever, even in a 182 or 172, I don't take off VFR and fly around below the clouds trying to get my IFR clearance, especially around Charlotte Class B airspace. That's insanity. I'm sorry, but it's insanity. I have seen it done numerous times when I was young in the right seat by pilots with 20,000 hours. Take off, flying around, trying to get around the clouds, trying to save 10 minutes. 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 minutes. Well, what I would have done is I would have got on the phone and I would have called 1-800-weather brief and I would have said, this is citation 1234 on the ground at Statesville. We're going IFR to Sarasota, Florida. And what he's going to say to me, okay, citation 1234, you can depart at 9 o'clock. If you're not off the ground by 9:30, it's void. When you depart, I want you to take off. I want you to fly heading 360, climb the 5,000 feet, and I want you to contact center at 124.8, squawk 0134. And I'm going to read that back to him. And he's going to save that in his computer. And his computer saves that route. Nobody else can get in it. Taking off VFR in a jet, going 175 miles an hour, trying to stay under the clouds. The sun made 3 radio calls trying to get approach or center to activate the IFR flight plan. They're too low. They're flying around. They cannot penetrate that cloud legally unless you're on an IFR clearance with an IFR airplane and you're IFR rated and you're IFR current. But at this point, they got so many things are just adding up. It's just snowballing. That's why they're flying around low. So finally, Mr. Biffle says, let's climb through the clouds without the clearance to get higher, to get so the radios would work. That radio is not going to work 1,000 foot above the ground with the mountains and everything. You can't pick up center. You got to climb. There's another mistake. You got the owner sitting in the middle telling them what to do. Do this. Owners don't do that. Captains don't allow that. Now, I see it all the time with me. I just ignore it, So that's the biggest. This is 5 no-nos already. You don't take off in a jet around Class B airspace, staying below the clouds, trying to pick up your clearance because your radio is not going to work. You got to get some altitude. Then the owner says, okay, let's just go through the clouds illegally. That's a serious FAA violation that can get you killed right there. And the owner's telling them to do that. So, you got the son in the right seat working the radios. He's got an instrument rating, but a 175-hour instrument young man who's probably a remarkable smart young man. He is not qualified to sit over and work them radios in a high-stress environment around Charlotte. You need somebody that's got some experience. So, while they're flying, Greg Biffle again, the left engine is showing more power than the right engine. He's sitting back there telling them stuff, It's his airplane. He paid for it. He paid for the fuel. He pays for the pilots. He's got a multi-engine, I think he has a multi-engine commercial with a rotorcraft rating, so he kind of knows what's going on. He's a very intelligent person. He's a race car driver. He's telling them, I'm sure Mr. Dutton was aware of that. Sometimes older engines will be a little different, so you got to fine-tune that, especially if you're always starting the left engine first. And the reason you do that, because the battery cable is shorter to that engine, so you're not draining your battery as much. So a lot of times the left engine is going to be a little more worn than the right engine because it gets used more. So sometimes you have to adjust that. If you have an airplane with FADEC, you just go click, 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 and the computer does that for you. That's an older airplane, and they didn't have FADEC. So he has to look up there, and he has to see the indications, and he has to adjust that. If this engine's running hot, you got to pull it back a little bit. If this engine's producing more power than this one, you got to kind of adjust that. This is part of owning a 50-year-old airplane. This is part of it. You got to get the calculations out and the books out and the charts out, and you got to calculate all that. If you got a new airplane, you can do that in your FMS and it'll do it. Now, they had a Garmin 750 that will do a lot of that if you set it up to do that. So there again, you got the owner. He's not even in a seat. He's sitting in the aisle. There's not a seat there. He's sitting in the aisle telling them stuff. Climb the 4,000 to get the radio. Your thrust reverser light's not working. Your engine instruments don't match. He's sitting there telling them stuff. I'm sure the young boys over here, he's loving it. He's flying. He's in the clouds flying. He ain't got no clue what's going on. The captain at this point is probably a little irritated with the owner telling him stuff, okay? Because I'm sure the owner knows the situation with his license, okay? He probably okayed the boy to sit up there. He might not have known. It doesn't matter. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Safety is safety. Rules are rules. There's a reason. You need a SIC. And I guarantee you that captain doesn't fly the 757, the 767, the Airbus A320, the 737 that he's got a type rating on. He doesn't put his son in the right seat or unqualified pilot in the right seat. Number one, the company wouldn't allow it. Number two, the FAA rules don't allow it. He needed a qualified first officer. And if he would have had that, a lot of this would not have happened, because that takes the stress off of him having to worry with all this, you know. I have told people before, even owners, when they're up there doing that, I just put my arm across. Anytime someone approaches that cockpit, you put your arm across. If you hit a bump and they fall forward and hit them thrust power levers, it's not good. You don't want people up in that cockpit bothering you, especially the owner. That's worse. I don't mind during a flight when you level off and everything's calmed down and the workloads, and have someone come up there and you just casually put your arm across and them ask questions and this and this. But when you're taking off and the weather's bad and you got lights going off and you got the owner up here doing this, that's a big no-no. But the owner did say while they're taxiing, these lights are not working. And that should have been a stop right there. That's another stop right there, especially going down the runway. So they take off. and they're flying low because the weather was good, but the weather's coming down. So they're trying to stay VFR below the clouds. The young man is trying to talk on the radio. They're too low. They can't reach them. They don't want to penetrate the clouds to get up to get the radio frequency working. The owner's saying, climb, just go ahead and go to the clouds and get the radio working. It's just really getting bad as soon as they take off. Now, they're scud running. Scud running is they're trying to stay under the clouds. At one point, they're 1,000 foot, 600 foot, 1,800 foot below the clouds trying to fly around to get the radio working. Then the other problems start happening. Other problems start happening. At one time, they went ahead and climbed the 4,000 foot. Now, they did that. They're not on the IFR clearance. So they're in the clouds at 4,000 foot, flying around, trying to get the radio clearance. Now, they've made the decision for some reason to come back to the airport. It seems like some of the captain's instruments weren't working properly. So he hands command to the airplane to his son while he's trying to fix that. Now, in a real life situation, when you got a certified SIC or captain over there, this is what you say. The autopilot's on, we're level at 4,000, we're heading at 360, our speed is 175, your controls, okay? So before he gets the controls, he understands everything that's going on. You just don't say your controls, and then he's got to figure out all this. That's what you say. The autopilot is on, we're level at 4,000, we're heading 360, our speed is 175, your controls. Then he says, my controls. Then he's flying the plane, and I don't even think it's on autopilot. I think they're hand flying this. And the captain is trying to figure out what's going on with some of the instruments not working. Now, I'm pretty sure that it's analog on the left side as it is on the right side. I've got a picture of the cockpit, but I can't really see the left side. But the right side is analog instruments. You can fly all day long from the right. I can sit in the left seat and look over there and fly all day long looking at the right seat instruments because I've done it teaching. I can sit in the left seat and fly looking at the instruments on the left because I got so much time doing it, teaching people. Now, if you don't do that all the time, you can't do it. It's awkward, So this is what he did. He gave the plane to his son, which is just crazy illegal. Our illegal activities have just gone off the wall now. Now, they're basically in an emergency. So in an emergency, you can deviate from any FAA rule to meet that emergency. But they should have never put themselves into this situation. So now, the boy's flying the plane, and the dad is trying to figure out the electronic problems. There's spots. The GNS 750 has a SIM card in there that remembers everything. But there's spots where spaces are missing. So that indicates to me they got an electrical problem and the stuff goes out and comes back on. Same thing with the voice recorder. There's spots that are missing, which is saying there's an electrical problem. Things are going out, coming back on, going out, coming back on. Now, what might have happened when they took off and they started those engines? It's a generator, alternator built in together. So when you start the engine, it's a generator starter. It's not an alternator. It's a generator starter. When you start those engines, you got them in start mode. Then once you start them, you flip them up to generator mode. So they're making electricity. Now, on the checklist, it's the SIC's job generators to generate. Yes, you got to flip that switch. He's to read the checklist. The captain is to do everything on the checklist and say, check, yes, done, as indicated. If they're not doing that checklist right, and there's no recording of them doing the checklist when they're taxiing on the ground, I don't know, but if he left those switches to start and he didn't flip them up to generate, that could be causing all of this. It seems like while the boy was flying and the captain was trying to figure out why some of that stuff's not working, he might have caught that and put them up to generate, and then everything started working. Because there's a point when all of that started working again. So at this point, they decided to come back. They're coming back to the airport. So they come out of 4,000 and come back down. The captain calls the son to put the flaps down for landing. For approach, not landing. You got approach and you got landing. So he put the flaps down to approach. We hope. He might have put them all the way down. We don't know that. If he put them all the way down, they really doomed themselves. But that's the job of the captain, to watch everything he does. So a certified pilot, captain, is going to call flaps to approach. The FOO or the SIC is going to move the flap lever, and once it gets there, he's going to say flaps indicating approach to verify that. Now, he might have made a mistake and went all the way down. And that might be a problem. We don't know that. But that's where you need a qualified SIC. So they're kind of coming back in on downwind, and the captain calls flaps to approach is the proper call out. So I guess the son put those flaps down. Now he calls landing gear down. It's way too early, that low to the ground, to put the landing gear down. I don't care. You never add more drag to the airplane that you couldn't make it to the runway if the engines went out. There is no indication that any of those engines were not performing correctly. The only indication was one of them was running a little faster than the other. But that's it. When you deal with those airplanes, that's all of them. They're all like that. It's an old airplane with old engines. If it's got brand new engines, they're going to sync up real nice. But I think the TBO is 5,000 to 6,000 hours on those engines. And at 3,000, you got to do a hot section to just keep the maintenance. But that's a whole nother video. So there's no indication that there was any engine trouble with those engines. When they looked at those engines on the ground, they were fine. Now, they had some tree limbs go through them where they hit the trees, but there was not an engine problem. Now, at this point, they got the gear down and the flaps to land. Not to land, to approach. They're coming around and they're getting on final, but they're getting slow. Remember, they're full of fuel. They haven't burned off but a couple of 100 pounds of fuel at this point. But they got baggage in there. I think they had 4 people in there and 2 pilots, so I think it was 6 people total. That's a lot of weight for that airplane. So at this point, they're coming around and they're getting on final. At one point, the NTSB says they're doing 93. That's too slow for that airplane, full of fuel, with the gear and the flaps down on final. You gotta calculate that. That's an old airplane. You gotta get in the charts and you calculate, can the GNS 750 do that? Yes, if you set it up to do that, but you gotta set it up to do that. The job of the SIC when you're on final, they gotta calculate the approach speed for that weight, for that wind, for that temperature. And that's what they got to fly. The proper speed, just out of my mind on that plane from flying it, is probably 98 to 104. So let's say 101. So when they're on final and they're low, the job of the FO is to bring that up. Unstabilize 300-foot low. Unstabilize 200-foot low. That's his job, to call out anything that's wrong. If the speed is 101 and they're doing 98, that's the job of a certified, qualified co-pilot or SIC. VREF -5, VREF -10. VREF is the speed you're supposed to be on. When you're coming in on final, you're going to always be a little fast. So the call out's going to be VREF +20. That alerts the captain to slow down just a little bit. Then he's going to say VREF +10, VREF +5. That way the captain can concentrate on flying a plane, not looking at these older airplanes trying to figure the speed. But if his speed is off, evidently the captains, because they made reference while they're flying that the altimeter is not correct. Well, I think you got 3 altimeters in that airplane, but if they're not matching, they should be matching on the ground. You have to, when you're on the ground, set all the altimeters. And sometimes you got to set the altimeter on the autopilot, depending on what plane it is. You got to get the proper altimeter setting from ATIS. And you got to set it. Altimeter set 3 times. 1, 2, 3. That's the call out. If you didn't set that altimeter because you were rushing and you didn't want to use a cart and you wanted to hurry up and you didn't want to have to do an IFR clearance, if you get an IFR clearance, you might have to sit down there and wait before they release you. Because a lot of times they won't release you until that's clear. They didn't want to use 10 minutes here, didn't want to use 10 minutes here, they're rushing. So, on final, the job of the SIC or the qualified first officer, sometimes there's 2 captains, is to call out the speeds. If your speed is 101 and you're doing 93, that's go around, go around. Now, the NTSB said the power levers were full. So evidently, they brought them full. When you brought them full, it takes a few seconds for them to spool up. But when you're coming down like this and you're fixing to hit the ground, sometimes you don't have time, especially with the gear down and the flaps to land. That's the job of a qualified SIC, to call out those speeds. They're doing 93. That plane ain't gonna fly at 93, full of fuel with the flaps and the flaps to land. Somewhere, I guess they put the flaps to land, and we never heard the call out for it. The captain might have reached over there and done that. So, a qualified SIC, that's his job. On the ground, Captain, we got a light not working. Captain, we got a discrepancy here. Captain, we're 10 knots slow. VREF -10. That's a big red flag. That's his job. Nobody briefed on takeoff. We didn't hear a brief. This is the briefing on takeoff. Who's ever flying is going to brief it. If the captain's going to brief it, he's going to say, this is a left seat takeoff, heading 360, runway 36, flaps set for takeoff. Anything happens before V1, we're going to stop. Anything, any light, anything, we're going to stop. Anything happens after V1, we're going to go. We're going to take it to the air. We're going to do the checklist. We're going to come back around and we're going to land on 36. Do you concur? Do you have any questions? That's what he's asking the FO or the SIC. If they're qualified. If they're not qualified, he doesn't understand all of that. But any light, any discrepancy before V1, you just stop. You just stop. You don't just keep going for pressure, you know. Especially a thrust reversal light not working. That is one of the worst things that can happen on a jet. If the thrust reversal comes out in flight, especially on takeoff. So, they should have never taken off without a qualified co-pilot. They should have never taken off with some of the lights not working. They should have probably never did that battery start. You know, they should have never taken off without having an IFR clearance before you take off. That way you can take off and just go ahead and climb. You're not doing all this trying to stay under the clouds and stuff. There's mountains and towers all around there. They're in the mountains. They're not in Memphis where it's level, but there's still a lot of towers around Memphis. So those are the mistakes that were made. It's heartbreaking. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Greg Biffle was not the boss. The young man in the right seat was not the boss. Mr. Dutton was the boss. He should have from the beginning said, look, Greg, I know we're in a hurry. 30 more minutes in lieu of safety, it's not going to matter. Let's get the cart out here. Let's start the plane with the cart. Taxiing out, you got lights not working. You never let the plane, the boss, the controllers, or the passengers rush you. Pull over and figure out that light. Don't take off with a thrust reverser light not working. Don't take off in bad weather, trying to fly the below like clouds, picking up an IFR clearance where the radio's not going to work because you're too low. Those were the mistakes that were made. They said the baggage door was damaged when they hit the trees. The baggage door was there. The baggage door coming off was not the issue. One of the engines not working was not the issue. The issue was they had some electronical issues in the plane that they were dealing with. And they got so wrapped up in that, they lost control of the airplane. There's an MD-11 crashed, I think in Nova Scotia, years ago. When a light came on, they should have just ignored it and kept flying and landed. But they kept obsessing over that light and they crashed the airplane. Same thing in Florida. A light came on and they were just obsessing with the light, flying around, worrying about this light, and they crashed the plane. There's numerous accidents where high-time captains and first officers crash the airplane worrying about things they don't need to be worrying about. So you want to take off with no worries. Taking off and not being on an IFR flight plan, you just added a big red flag of worry on yourself. Taking off thinking in your mind, these lights are not working, these lights are not working. And you're thinking about, and you're watching that light, this light's not working. But the guy wants to go, the guy wants to go. He's in a hurry, he's rich, he's a businessman, it's his airplane, he's paying me, he wants to go, I don't want to disappoint him. I guarantee you, when he was working for the airlines and that light came on, they didn't take off. They called the controller, taxi him. You know, ground, this is Delta Flight 1482. We need to pull over and work out a problem and call maintenance. They're going to call maintenance on their other radio, and they're going to say, we got this light not working. Now, pilots and mechanics are like this. This is a pilot, this is a mechanic. You got to be smart to be a mechanic. To be a pilot, anybody can be a pilot. I'm a pilot. So the mechanic is going to say, do this, do this, do this, and it works. And numerous times they do that, and the mechanic comes out to the plane, it works. And the mechanic walks back, these stupid pilots, you know. Pilots think different than mechanics. And the airlines, with those lights and those things not working, and trying to take off in a jet and pick up your IFR in the air, I don't even do that in a 172 or 182. I don't do that. I just don't do it. I have seen it numerous times with me in the right seat and a captain in the left. When I was young, didn't know any better. In reality, for the airlines, he would have never taken off with those lights on. He would have never taken off with an unqualified person in the right seat. He would have never taken off VFR in bad weather and try to get a clearance. Low, below the clouds. you can't get radio reception. And he sure wouldn't have flew his jet through the clouds to 4,000 feet without being on the IFR clearance to get radio reception. So this is some of the things that happened on the flight. It was not the engines, it was not the baggage door. It was an electronical issue, and some of the instruments weren't working. That's another time that you really need a qualified SIC or captain or FO. It could have worked out a lot better. That way one person can fly, the other person can get the checklist out. Left side instruments in up. Do this, do this, do this, do this. And the co-pilot looks at the emergency procedures, and a lot of times it's not emergency. Looks at the procedure, calls it out, the captain does it. Call it out, the captain does it. Now, if the captain is handing the controls to a young man with 175 hours in a jet, he's trying to hand fly the jet, and the captain's scrambling with the checklist trying to look, what do we do wrong? What do we do wrong? What do we do wrong? That's just a bad situation. So I don't want to beat a dead horse to death. The whole thing upsets me. It was senseless. You gotta follow the rules of flying. Don't let the plane, the passengers, the boss, or the controllers rush you. Don't do anything that's going to jeopardize the safety of the crew, the passengers, the airplane, or an FAA violations. All of those basic rules of flying were just thrown out the door. So as more information comes out, I'll look at it, evaluate it, and make a video on it. But this is the new information that came out. And there'll be more. It'll probably take a year or 2 years before they give us the whole thing. But this is all you need to know, is this right here. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, share. Any questions you have, send me a message and I'll answer them. What you want to hear about, send me a message and I'll make a video on it. Thanks.